They treated her like a ghost in her own home. For 5 years, Leo was the invisible wife, mocked by her mother-in-law, neglected by her husband, and forgotten by the powerful Harrington dynasty. To them, she was nothing more than a mistake that needed to be erased. So, when the billionaire patriarch Silas Harrington died, no one even told her the time of the will reading. They expected her to stay in the kitchen while they divided the empire. But Leo didn't just walk into that room uninvited. She walked in carrying a secret that would burn their legacy to the ground. When the lawyer finally spoke, he didn't look at the greedy sons or the weeping widow. He looked straight at the invisible wife and said 3 words that made the entire room gasp. You won't believe what old Silas left her, and the dark reason why. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. That's how Leo felt standing outside the wrought-iron gates of the Harrington estate. The water seeped through the thin soles of her shoes she had bought at a discount rack 3 years ago, and chilled her to the bone. She checked her watch. PM. Inside that sprawling Victorian mansion, the reading of Silas Harrington's will was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. sharp. Her husband, Julian, hadn't told her. In fact, Julian hadn't spoken to her in 3 days, not since he threw a crystal tumbler against the wall above her head, because his shirts weren't starched to his liking. She had learned about the time only because she overheard the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, whispering about the catering schedule on the phone. You shouldn't be here, Leo, she told herself, her breath misting in the cold October air. They don't want you here. But Silas had been the only one in that nest of vipers who had ever looked at her and seen a human being. He was a hard man, ruthless in business, known for crushing competitors like bugs. But in the quiet moments, when the cancer began to eat away at his iron constitution, he had spoken to her. He had seen her. Leo pushed the intercom button. Deliveries go to the side entrance, a voice crackled. It was Victoria, her mother-in-law. The voice was unmistakable, clipped, aristocratic, and dripping with disdain. It's Leo, she said, her voice shaking slightly before she steeled it. Open the gate, Victoria. Silence stretched for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then, with a reluctant buzz and a mechanical groan, the heavy gates swung inward. The walk up the driveway was a lonely one. Luxury cars lined the front circle, an Aston Martin, 2 Mercedes G-Wagons, and a sleek red Ferrari that belonged to Julian's younger brother, Marcus. They were all inside, likely drinking Silas's best scotch and calculating how quickly they could liquidate his assets. When Leo opened the heavy oak front doors, the warmth of the house hit her, smelling of beeswax, old money, and expensive lilies. The funeral flowers were still fresh. Leo? She turned to see Julian standing in the hallway. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than her father had made in a year. He looked handsome in that sharp, predatory way that had charmed her 5 years ago before the mask fell off. Now, his blue eyes were narrowed in irritation. What are you doing here? He hissed, glancing over his shoulder toward the library. I told you to stay at the apartment. This is family business. I am your wife, Julian, Leo said, clutching her purse tighter. That makes me family. Julian let out a dry, cruel chuckle. He stepped closer, towering over her. You're an accessory, Leo. A temporary lapse in judgment I made during a rebellious phase. My father is dead. The only reason you're still Mrs. Harrington is because I haven't had the time to file the papers yet. Don't embarrass me today. Let her in, Julian. The voice came from the library doorway. It was Marcus, the younger brother. He was leaning against the frame, swirling a glass of amber liquid. Marcus wasn't cruel like Julian. He was just indifferent. To him, Leo was furniture. Lawyer's asking for everyone to be present, Marcus said, looking bored. That includes the stray. Julian's jaw tightened. He glared at Leo one last time. Sit in the back. Don't speak. And for God's sake, try to look like you belong here. Leo walked past him, head high, though her knees felt like water. The library was a cavernous room, lined with mahogany bookshelves that reached the ceiling. A roaring fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to thaw the icy atmosphere. Victoria Harrington sat in a high-backed velvet chair near the fire, looking like a mourning queen. She wore a black veil that didn't quite hide the calculating look in her eyes. Beside her sat the eldest sister, Beatrice, scrolling on her phone, looking annoyed that her vacation in Saint-Tropez had been interrupted by something as inconvenient as her father's death. And then there was the lawyer. Mr. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He sat behind Silas's massive desk, a thick leather portfolio in front of him. He was Silas's oldest friend and confidant, the only man who knew where all the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. As Leo entered, Victoria looked up. Her lip curled. "Who let the help in?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying easily across the room. "She's not the help, Mother," Marcus said, dropping into a leather sofa. "She's Julian's wife. Technically." "Technically," Victoria scoffed. "Sterling, can we get on with this? I have a migraine coming on, and looking at cheap polyester is making it worse." Leo felt the sting of the insult, but she said nothing. She found a wooden chair in the far corner, away from the circle of plush leather seats the family occupied. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses. He looked tired. He looked sad. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Julian, then Beatrice, then Marcus, and finally Victoria. When his eyes landed on Leo in the back corner, he paused. A strange expression crossed his face. Was it pity? Respect? "Is everyone present?" Sterling asked. "Yes, yes, we're all here," Julian said impatiently, checking his Rolex. "Let's get to the assets. We know the drill. Mother gets the estate, the trust is split 3 ways between us, and the charity gets a token donation to keep the tax wolves at bay. Can we sign?" Sterling didn't move. He placed his hand on the portfolio. Silas made changes. Extensive changes. 3 days before he died. The air in the room shifted instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp tension. "Changes?" Beatrice looked up from her phone. "What kind of changes? Daddy wasn't in his right mind at the end." "Everyone knows that." "Silas was perfectly lucid," Sterling said sharply. "I videotaped the signing myself to ensure there would be no questions of competency." Victoria sat up straighter, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "Read it, Arthur. Stop stalling." Sterling opened the folder. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. "I, Silas Edward Harrington, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all prior wills and testaments," Sterling began, his voice steady. He went through the minor bequests first. The staff received generous bonuses. The gardener, a man named Thomas who had worked there for 40 years, was given the cottage on the edge of the property. The family rolled their eyes at every mention, tapping their feet. "To my wife, Victoria," Sterling read. Victoria leaned forward, a hungry look in her eyes. "I leave the sum of $500,000 and the right to reside in the Harrington estate for a period of 6 months, after which she must vacate the premises." The silence that followed was deafening. "Excuse me," Victoria whispered, her face draining of color. $500,000, and I have to leave. This is my house." "It was Silas's house," Sterling corrected gently, "and he has left it to someone else." This is absurd. Julian jumped up. He was obviously drugged. Who gets the house? Me? Beatrice? Sit down, Julian, Sterling commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. Julian sank back down, stunned. Sterling continued. To my children, Beatrice, Julian, and Marcus. The three siblings held their breath. I leave the sum of $1 million each. This is a one-time payment. You will have no shares in Harrington Enterprises, no board seats, and no access to the family trust. What? Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered on the Persian rug, splashing whiskey everywhere. $1 million. That won't even cover my debts for the year. You can't do this, Beatrice shrieked. We are Harringtons. Who gets the company? Who gets the billions? Sterling looked up from the document. He took a slow breath. He looked past the raging Victoria, past the stunned Julian, past the panicked Marcus. He looked directly at Leo in the corner. To the only person in this family who ever asked me how I was feeling without wanting something in return, Sterling read, his eyes locking with Leo's terrified gaze. To the only person who brought me soup when the nurses were asleep. To the only person who treated me like a father, even though I was a terrible father-in-law. Leo's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. No, she thought. No, please don't. I leave the entirety of the Harrington estate, the majority-controlling shares of Harrington Enterprises, the offshore accounts in the Caymans and Zurich, and the remainder of my personal assets, valued at approximately $4.2 billion. Sterling paused for effect. To my daughter-in-law, Leo Vance Harrington. The gasp that went through the room sucked the oxygen out of the air. Everyone turned to look at her. Julian's face went from shock to a twisted, horrifying shade of purple. "Her!" Victoria screamed, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at Leo. That gold-digging gutter rat! Furthermore, Sterling raised his voice to cut over the shouting. There is a condition, a specific clause that Silas added. If Leo is to die under suspicious circumstances, or if she is coerced into signing over the assets, the entire fortune will be liquidated and donated to the Cat Fanciers Association of America. She cannot be divorced without her consent, and she maintains total control over the monthly allowances of Victoria, Julian, Beatrice, and Marcus. If she decides to cut you off, you get nothing. Sterling closed the folder with a snap. Mrs. Harrington, Sterling said to Leo, standing up. Or should I say, Madam Chairwoman, your car is waiting. We have a board meeting in an hour. Leo sat frozen. She looked at Julian. He looked like he was about to vomit. She slowly stood up. The shoes that were too thin, the dress that was too cheap, none of it mattered any more. She looked at the family that had tormented her for 5 years. I think, Leo said, her voice quiet but ringing clear in the silence. I'll take the library for my office. Victoria, please have your things moved out of the master suite by tonight. I prefer the view from that room. Julian lunged at her. Julian's fingers were inches from Leo's throat when the blur of motion intercepted him. It wasn't Mr. Sterling, who was too old for brawls, but 2 large men in dark suits who had been standing silently by the library doors. They moved with the precision of trained military personnel. One blocked Julian's strike with a forearm, while the other twisted Julian's arm behind his back, forcing him face first onto the expensive Persian rug, right next to Marcus's spilled whiskey. Let go of me! Do you know who I am? Julian roared, his face pressed against the wool. I am Julian Harrington. Not anymore, you're not, Mr. Sterling said calmly, removing his glasses and cleaning them with a silk handkerchief. Technically, you are now a trespasser assaulting the owner of this property. Leo, would you like to press charges? The room went dead silent. Even Victoria stopped her hyperventilating to stare at Leo. Leo looked down at her husband. For 5 years, this man had dictated her life. He had told her what to wear, who to speak to, and how to smile. He had made her feel small so he could feel big. Seeing him pinned to the floor, struggling like a caught fish, something inside her chest unlocked. The fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into something colder. "Let him up," Leo said softly. The guard looked at her for confirmation. She nodded. They released Julian, who scrambled to his feet, adjusting his jacket, his face red with humiliation. "Leo, honey," Julian panted, his tone shifting instantly from aggression to a sickly, desperate charm. I lost my head. The grief. You know how much I loved Father. This stress. It's too much. I didn't mean to scare you." He reached out a hand to touch her shoulder. Leo didn't flinch, but she took a deliberate step back. "Don't touch me, Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a new weight to it. "And don't insult my intelligence. You didn't love your father. You loved his checkbook." "How dare you!" Victoria screeched from her chair. "After we took you in, after we gave you a life." "You gave me a cage," Leo corrected. She turned to Mr. Sterling. "Arthur, you said I control their allowances." "Down to the penny," Sterling confirmed, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "The trust fund stipulations are clear. You determine the monthly stipend based on good behavior and contribution to society, as Silas phrased it." Leo looked at the 4 of them, Victoria, Julian, Marcus, and Beatrice. They looked like cornered wolves. "Get out," Leo said. "Excuse me," Beatrice scoffed. "We live here." "Not anymore," Leo said. Sterling read the will. "Victoria has 6 months, but only if I allow it. After that display, I don't feel safe with you in the house. You can stay in the guest wing tonight. Tomorrow, you pack. As for you, Julian, you can go to your mistress's apartment in the city. I'm sure she has room." Julian froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Leo lied. She didn't know for sure, but she had suspected it for years. The late nights, the smell of unfamiliar perfume. The panic in his eyes confirmed it. "Get out of my sight. All of you. Now." It was the security guard stepping forward that finally broke them. Muttering curses, weeping, and threatening lawsuits, the Harrington family filed out of the library. When the heavy oak doors finally clicked shut, leaving Leo alone with the lawyer, her legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, trembling. "Breathe, Leo," Sterling said gently. He walked over to a sidebar and poured a glass of water, handing it to her. "You did well." Silas would have been proud. "Why?" Leo asked, staring at the water. "Why me, Arthur? He knew they would eat me alive. I'm not a CEO, I'm not a fighter. I'm just the girl who made him chamomile tea." Sterling pulled a small brass key from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "Silas was many things, Leo. A ruthless businessman, yes. But in the end, he was a man full of regrets. He watched you. He watched how you treated the maids with respect while Victoria screamed at them. He watched how you stayed by his side during the chemo when his own children were vacationing in Bali. He knew you weren't a fighter. That's exactly why he gave you the sword. He knew you were the only one who wouldn't use it to stab someone in the back." He pushed the key toward her. "This is for the private safe in the master bedroom. He told me to tell you, read the red journal first. It explains everything. It explains the twist that even I didn't see coming until the very end." Leo took the key. The metal was cold in her hand. That night, the mansion felt different. It was no longer a prison. It was a fortress, and she was the Castellan. She moved into the master suite, a room she had been forbidden from entering for 5 years. It smelled of Silas, tobacco and leather. She found the safe behind a painting of a storm-tossed ship. Her hands shook as she turned the key. Inside, stacked neatly, were bundles of documents, hard drives, and a worn red leather journal. She took the journal to the bed, sat down, and opened the first page. Silas's handwriting was jagged, written in the final months when his hands had started to fail. To Leo, it began, "If you are reading this, I am dead, and the vultures are circling. Do not be afraid. I have left you the money, not just because you are kind, but because you are the only one who can save this family from itself, or destroy it if you have to. But before you decide what to do with them, you need to know what they did to me, and what they tried to do to you." Leo turned the page, and the air left her lungs. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the master suite, echoing the turmoil inside Leo's mind. She sat cross-legged on the massive 4-poster bed, the red journal open on her lap. The lamp on the bedside table cast a warm glow on the pages, but the words written there were dark enough to blot out the sun. Silas hadn't just been observant, he had been a spy in his own home. Entry, August 14th, 2024. I found the transfers today. Julian thinks he's clever, funneling money through the shell company in Panama. $2 million this quarter alone. He's not investing it. He's paying off blackmailers. It seems my golden son got involved with the wrong crowd in Vegas. The mob doesn't care that his last name is Harrington. He's stealing from the company to save his knees. I should turn him in. But I can't bring myself to do it yet. I need to see how deep the rot goes. Leo gasped. Julian wasn't just a cheater, he was a thief, and he was in debt to dangerous people. That explained his erratic behavior, the desperate need for his inheritance. He didn't just want the money for luxury, he needed it to stay alive. She turned the page. Entry, September 2nd, 2024. Beatrice came to visit. She didn't ask about the diagnosis. She asked about the jewelry collection. She's been selling off her grandmother's diamonds, fakes replacing the originals in the safe. She thinks I'm blind. She's funding that boyfriend of hers, the artist who snorts half of Columbia up his nose every weekend. They are waiting for me to die like crows on a wire. Leo felt a wave of nausea. She remembered Beatrice crying at the funeral, a performance worthy of an Oscar. It had all been a lie. But the next entry froze her blood. It was dated just 3 months ago. Entry, July 10th, 2025. I heard them. I was in the library, the door cracked open. Victoria and Julian. They were discussing Leo. They weren't just complaining about her. They were planning. Julian wants a divorce, but he knows the prenup I forced him to sign gives Leo a substantial settlement if he initiates it. They were discussing alternatives. Victoria suggested a stairwell accident. "She's clumsy," Victoria said. "Who would question it?" Leo dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Her hands flew to her mouth. The time she had tripped on the loose carpet at the top of the stairs 2 months ago. The carpet that had been perfectly secure the day before. She had caught the railing just in time, bruising her arm but saving her neck. Victoria had been standing at the bottom, watching. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't rushed up to help. She had just watched. They tried to kill me. The realization wasn't hysterical. It was clarifying. It washed away the last lingering guilt she felt about taking the inheritance. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was survival. Silas had given her the fortune as a shield. She picked the journal up again. There was one folded letter tucked into the back cover. It was written on different stationery, the handwriting shakier, likely written days before he died. "My dear Leo, I know by now you are frightened. I know you are reading these horrors and wondering how you ended up in this nest of vipers. I am sorry I didn't protect you sooner. I was a coward. I let the pursuit of wealth blind me to the monsters I was raising. But there is one secret I kept even from Sterling, a secret that changes everything about why I chose you. Years ago, before I met Victoria, I fell in love with a woman named Marianne. She was a waitress at a diner I frequented before I made my first $1 million. We had a brief, passionate summer, but my father threatened to disown me if I didn't marry into status, so I left her. I left her pregnant. I never knew what happened to the child. I searched for years, quietly. Last year, I finally hired a private investigator to find out what happened to Marianne's baby. Marianne died in childbirth. The baby was put into the foster system. She was bounced around, abused, neglected. But she grew up to be kind. She grew up to be strong. That baby was you, Leo. You didn't marry into this family by accident. I didn't orchestrate the meeting between you and Julian. That was fate's cruel sense of humor. But when you walked through that door 5 years ago as Julian's girlfriend, I recognized Marianne's eyes immediately. I ran the DNA test from a hair sample on your brush. It was a match. You are not my daughter-in-law, Leo. You are my daughter, my firstborn, my true heir. I couldn't tell you while I was alive. It would have destroyed you. And Julian. God knows what Julian would have done if he knew he had married his half-sister. Though you share no blood with him, as Julian was adopted by Victoria and me. Another secret for another time. Yes, Julian is adopted. You are the only Harrington by blood. The company is yours not by gift, but by birthright. Take it, rule it, and don't let them take an inch. Love, Dad. Leo stared at the word Dad until it blurred through her tears. The world tilted on its axis. The man she had served tea to, the man she had cared for, he was her father. And Julian was adopted. The revulsion of incest vanished, replaced by a staggering irony. Julian, who prided himself on his Harrington blood, was the stray. She, the gutter rat, was the true heir. A knock on the door shattered the moment. It was heavy, aggressive pounding. "Leo, open this door!" It was Julian. He sounded drunk, and he wasn't alone. She could hear the distinct click of a lock being picked. The master suite had a heavy deadbolt, but Julian had the override codes for the electronic locks, codes she hadn't changed yet. She scrambled off the bed, clutching the journal to her chest. She looked at the digital clock, 2 Sunday SARS a.m. The security guards Sterling had hired were patrolling the perimeter, but they were outside. Julian was inside. The electronic lock beeped. Access granted. The door swung open. Julian stood there, swaying, a crowbar in his hand. Behind him stood Marcus, looking pale but resolute. "We're not done, wifey," Julian slurred, stepping into the room. "You think a piece of paper makes you the boss? In this house, possession is 9/10 of the law, and we're taking it back." Leo backed up toward the balcony doors, her mind racing. She needed a weapon. She needed help. "Get out, Julian," she warned, her voice trembling but loud. "I know about the Panama accounts. I know about the mob." Julian stopped dead. The drunkenness seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, sober terror. He gripped the crowbar tighter. "You know too much," he whispered. "Marcus, shut the door." Marcus hesitated. "Julian, you said we were just going to scare her into signing the papers. You didn't say anything about—" "Shut the damn door!" Julian screamed. Marcus slammed the door shut and locked it. Leo was trapped. The crowbar in Julian's hand caught the dim light, a dull, heavy grey against the plush luxury of the bedroom. Leo's back pressed against the cold glass of the balcony door. The wind howled outside, but inside, the silence was heavy enough to choke on. "You think you're smart," Julian spat, taking another step. "You think because the old man went senile and signed a paper, you own us? I'm going to make you sign it all back. And then, maybe you'll have an accident." "Marcus," Leo said, her voice sharp. She didn't look at Julian. She locked eyes with the younger brother. "Do you know why Julian is so desperate? Do you know why he's willing to kill me tonight?" Marcus blinked, his hand still on the doorknob. "Shut up. We just want what's ours." "It's not yours anymore, Marcus, but even if it was, you wouldn't see a dime," Leo said, speaking fast. "Ask him about the Panama accounts. Ask him about the $2 million he stole from the family trust last quarter." Julian stiffened. "She's lying, Marcus. Grab her." $2 million, Leo pressed, seeing doubt flicker in Marcus's eyes. "He didn't invest it. He paid it to a syndicate in Vegas because he has a gambling problem. The mob is coming for him, Marcus. If he gets control of the estate, he's going to drain every account dry to save his own skin. You'll be left with nothing but his debts." Marcus looked at Julian. "Is that true? Is that where the liquidity went last month? You told me it was a bad tech investment." "We don't have time for this," Julian screamed, raising the crowbar. He lunged. Leo didn't scream. She dropped to the floor, rolling to the side. The crowbar smashed into the glass of the balcony door, shattering it into 1,000 diamonds. The wind roared into the room, sending curtains whipping violently. "You idiot!" Marcus yelled, grabbing Julian's arm. "You're making too much noise. The guards! Let go of me!" Julian turned on his brother, shoving him backward. Marcus tripped over the ottoman and hit his head on the corner of the bed frame, slumping to the floor. Julian turned back to Leo, his eyes wild, totally unhinged. "Now, no one is going to hear you scream." He raised the weapon again. Leo grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the bedside table, prepared to fight for her life. Suddenly, the bedroom door exploded inward. It wasn't unlocked. It was kicked off its hinges. 2 security guards stormed in, weapons drawn, with Mr. Sterling right behind them. "Drop it!" the lead guard bellowed. Julian froze. The red dot of a taser laser danced on his chest. He looked from the guards to Leo, panting heavily. With a guttural roar of frustration, he threw the crowbar down. It clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. "This isn't over," Julian hissed at Leo as the guards slammed him against the wall, cuffing his hands behind his back. "I'm a Harrington. You can't keep me out of my own company." Leo stood up, brushing glass shards from her nightgown. She looked at Marcus, who was groaning on the floor, and then at Julian, pinned like an animal. "Get them out of here," Leo said, her voice ice-cold. "And call the police. I want a restraining order filed tonight. If either of them steps foot within 500 feet of this estate, I want them arrested." As they dragged Julian away, screaming obscenities, Mr. Sterling walked over to Leo. He looked at the shattered glass and the journal on the bed. "Are you all right?" he asked. Leo picked up the red journal. She felt a strange sense of calm. The fear had burned away, leaving only clarity. "I'm fine, Arthur," she said. "But cancel my appointments for tomorrow morning. We have a board meeting at noon. And I need you to prepare the DNA results. It's time the world knew the truth." The boardroom of Harrington Enterprises was on the 45th floor, overlooking the Seattle skyline. It was a room designed to intimidate, with a table long enough to land a plane on, and chairs that cost more than most cars. 12 board members sat around the table in expensive grey suits, murmuring in low, concerned tones. The stock had dipped 4% since the news of Silas's death. They were nervous. They wanted stability. At the head of the table, 2 seats were empty. The heavy double doors opened. Victoria Harrington walked in first. She wore a Chanel suit and a look of absolute entitlement. Despite being kicked out of the mansion the night before, she carried herself like she still owned the building. Behind her walked Julian. He was out on bail, looking haggard, his eyes dark with lack of sleep, but he had shaved and put on his best tie. "Gentlemen," Victoria said, taking a seat near the head of the table. "Apologies for the delay. We had some domestic disturbances to settle. But we are here to reassure you that the Harrington legacy is secure." "Is it?" asked Mr. Henderson, a senior board member. "We heard rumors that the will was unexpected." "A temporary administrative error," Julian said smoothly, sitting beside his mother. "My father was not in his right mind. We are contesting the will. In the meantime, as the eldest son, I will be assuming the role of interim CEO." "I don't think so." The voice came from the entrance. Leo stood there. She wasn't wearing her usual faded cardigans. She wore a tailored white suit she had found in the back of her closet, something she'd bought for a job interview 5 years ago that Julian had forbidden her from taking. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Mr. Sterling stood beside her, holding a thick briefcase. She walked into the room. The silence was absolute. "You have no business here," Victoria snapped. "Security." "I own the security company," Leo said calmly, pulling out the chair at the head of the table. Silas's chair. She sat down. "And I own 51% of this company. If you speak out of turn again, Victoria, I will have you removed." Victoria's mouth snapped shut. The board members exchanged stunned glances. "Gentlemen," Leo addressed the room, ignoring her husband and mother-in-law. "You are worried about the future of Harrington Enterprises. You should be. Because for the last 5 years, this company has been bled dry by the people sitting to my left." "Lies!" Julian slammed his hand on the table. "She's a gold digger. She seduced a dying man." Leo nodded to Sterling. The lawyer connected his laptop to the room's projector system. A document appeared on the massive screen. It was a forensic accounting report. "This," Leo pointed to the screen, "shows unauthorized transfers totaling $12 million over the last 3 years. Money funneled into shell companies controlled by Julian and Victoria Harrington." The board members gasped. Mr. Henderson put on his glasses, leaning forward. "Is this verified?" "By 3 independent auditors," Sterling confirmed. "This is embezzlement," Henderson whispered, looking at Julian with disgust. "It's a fabrication," Julian yelled, standing up. "She's trying to steal my birthright. I am Silas Harrington's son. I am the blood of this company." Leo stood up slowly. She looked small against the skyline, but she felt 10 feet tall. "That," she said softly, "is the biggest lie of all." She clicked the remote in her hand. The screen changed. 2 documents appeared side by side. On the left, a birth certificate. On the right, a DNA test result. "Silas Harrington knew about the theft," Leo said, her voice ringing clear. "But he also knew something else. He knew that the family he was raising was rot from the inside out. He ordered a DNA test 6 months ago." She pointed to the document on the left. Julian Harrington was adopted in 1992. His biological parents were convicted felons from Chicago. Silas and Victoria covered it up to present the image of a perfect family. Julian's face went white. He slumped back into his chair, looking as if he had been shot. The board murmured loudly now. "And the document on the right?" Henderson asked. "That," Leo said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "is my DNA test, compared against Silas Harrington's." She looked at Victoria, whose face was a mask of pure horror. "I am not just Leo Vance. I am Leo Harrington, Silas's biological daughter from a relationship he had before he met Victoria. I am the only blood heir to this family." The room erupted. "It's true," Sterling's voice cut through the noise. Silas confirmed it. He left the company to Leo not just because she was kind, but because she is his daughter. Leo leaned forward, her hands on the table, looking down at Julian. "You aren't the heir, Julian. You're just a thief who married his sister without knowing it. And now, you're fired." The fall of Julian Harrington was fast and brutal. Within hours of the board meeting, security had escorted him out of the building with nothing but a cardboard box containing a stapler and a framed photo of himself. His credit cards were frozen. The company car was repossessed before he even reached the parking garage. But the real nightmare began when his phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a text message. A picture of him walking out of the building, taken from a car across the street. The caption read, "Employment status changed. Debt remains. 24 hours." Julian stood on the rainy sidewalk, the water soaking his expensive suit, realizing he was a dead man walking. The Vegas syndicate didn't care about boardrooms or DNA tests. They wanted their $2 million. He had one card left to play, a card born of pure madness. That evening, Leo returned to the Harrington estate. She felt exhausted but lighter, as if a heavy coat had been taken off her shoulders. The house was quiet. Victoria had left earlier that afternoon, screaming insults as movers packed her things into a rental truck. Leo walked into the kitchen to make tea. She dismissed the staff for the night, wanting solitude. As the kettle began to whistle, the lights in the mansion flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed the house. Leo froze. The storm outside hadn't been bad enough to cut the power. She reached for her phone in her pocket, but a hand clamped over her mouth before she could dial. "Don't scream," a voice hissed in her ear. It was Julian. He smelled of sweat, cheap whiskey, and gasoline. "Scream, and I burn this whole place down with us inside." He dragged her through the dark hallway, down the servants' stairs, and out into the garage. He shoved her into the passenger seat of her own old sedan, the one he had never let her drive because it was too ugly for the driveway. "Drive," he commanded, pointing a small black pistol at her ribs. "To the docks, the old warehouse, on Pier 52. Leo's hands shook on the steering wheel, but her mind was racing. Why the docks? "Julian, this is kidnapping," she said, her voice steady, despite the gun digging into her side. "You're already facing embezzlement charges. This will put you away for life." "Life is better than what they will do to me," Julian screamed, slamming his hand on the dashboard. "I need the money, Leo. You have the access codes. You're going to wire the $2 million to the account I give you. Then I disappear. I leave the country. You never see me again." "They won't let you leave," Leo said softly, as she pulled onto the rain-slicked highway. "You're not a criminal mastermind, Julian. You're just a desperate man. Shut up and drive." They arrived at the abandoned pier 20 minutes later. The warehouse was a skeleton of rusting steel and rotting wood. Julian dragged her inside, illuminated only by the headlights of the car. "Open the laptop," he ordered, shoving a computer onto a crate. "Do it now." Leo opened the laptop. She typed in her credentials. The blue light of the screen illuminated Julian's face. He looked like a ghost, hollow-cheeked and terrified. "I can't just transfer $2 million without authorization, Julian," she said, stalling. "Sterling monitors the accounts. He'll flag it." "Then authorize it. You're the chairwoman." Julian waved the gun erratically. "Julian!" A deep voice echoed from the shadows of the warehouse. Julian spun around, aiming the gun into the darkness. "Who's there? Stay back!" 3 men stepped out of the gloom. They wore heavy coats and looked like they were carved from stone. These weren't police. These were the men Julian had been running from. "Mr. Harrington," the lead man said, his voice like gravel. "We saw you leave the estate. We figured you'd try something stupid." "I have the money!" Julian shrieked, backing up and grabbing Leo by the arm, using her as a shield. "She's transferring it right now. Just wait." "We don't want a wire transfer that can be traced," the man said, taking a step forward. "And we don't like it when people drag civilians into business, especially high-profile ones. Kidnapping the chairwoman of Harrington Enterprises? That brings heat. We don't like heat." Leo looked at the men, then at Julian. She realized with a jolt that Julian was the danger, but these men were the executioners. "Let her go," the man said. "We'll take you for a ride, Julian. We can work out a payment plan." Julian knew what that meant. A ride meant a shallow grave in the woods. "No!" Julian screamed. He tightened his grip on Leo's neck. "I'll shoot her. I swear I'll—" Click. The sound of the gun jamming was the loudest noise in the world. Julian had bought a cheap gun off the street, and in his panic, he hadn't checked the safety mechanism properly. Leo didn't hesitate. She stomped on Julian's instep with her heel, hard. He howled in pain and loosened his grip. She threw her elbow back into his ribs and scrambled away, diving behind a stack of pallets. "Get him," the lead man said calmly. The three men advanced on Julian. He threw the gun at them and turned to run, but he tripped over a coil of rope. He scrambled backward, sobbing, begging. "Please, she's my sister. She'll pay you. Leo, tell them." "Pay them." Leo stood up from behind the pallets. She looked at the man who had made her life a misery for 5 years. She looked at the brother who had tried to kill her. She looked at the lead mobster. "I don't know this man," Leo said clearly. The mobster nodded respectfully to her. "Go home, Mom. You didn't see anything tonight." Leo walked back to her car. She didn't look back. As she started the engine, she heard the sirens, not for Julian, but because she had triggered the silent alarm on her watch the moment they entered the warehouse. The police cars swarmed the pier, cutting off the mobsters and Julian. Leo watched in the rearview mirror as the police tackled Julian to the ground, saving him from the mob, but sealing his fate in prison. He was screaming her name as the cuffs clicked shut. 3 months later. The cemetery was quiet, bathed in the soft, golden light of an autumn afternoon. The leaves on the oak trees were turning the color of fire, drifting slowly down to cover the manicured grass. Leo walked along the stone path, a bouquet of white lilies in her hand. She wore a black trench coat, but underneath, a bright blue dress, a color Silas had once told her was his favorite, though she hadn't known why at the time. Now she knew. It was the color of her mother's eyes. She stopped in front of the large marble mausoleum. The name Harrington was etched into the stone. Below it, fresh lettering had been added. Silas Edward Harrington, beloved father and husband. And next to it, a smaller, older marker that Leo had paid to have moved from a pauper's grave in the city. Marianne Vance. Beloved mother. Leo placed the lilies between them. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Mom," she whispered. The wind rustled the trees, a gentle, answering sigh. A lot had changed in 90 days. The scandal of the Harrington kidnapping had dominated the news for weeks. Julian was currently awaiting trial for embezzlement, kidnapping, and attempted murder. His lawyers were pleading insanity, but the evidence was overwhelming. He would likely spend the next 20 years in a federal prison. Victoria had moved to a small apartment in Florida. Leo had, in a final act of grace, granted her a small monthly stipend, enough to live on, but not enough to buy influence or power. Beatrice and Marcus had been cut off completely and were forced to find jobs. Last Leo heard, Marcus was valeting cars at a hotel downtown. Leo sat on the stone bench opposite the grave. She took a deep breath. She was tired. Being CEO was harder than she imagined. There were sharks in the boardroom, competitors trying to test her, and the constant pressure of the public eye. But every time she felt like quitting, she remembered the red journal. She remembered Silas watching her from his window, hoping she would be strong enough. "I fired the CFO yesterday," she told the gravestone, a small smile playing on her lips. He tried to hide a bonus structure. "I told him I learned accounting from balancing a household budget on minimum wage. He didn't like that." She felt a presence behind her. She turned to see Mr. Sterling standing a few feet away, holding an umbrella, though it wasn't raining. "The car is ready, Miss Harrington," Sterling said softly. "You have the interview with Forbes in an hour." "Thank you, Arthur," Leo said. She stood up, brushing a leaf from her coat. "You know," Sterling said, looking at Silas's grave. "He was terrified, you know, when he found out who you were. He thought you would hate him for abandoning you." "I did for a moment," Leo admitted. "But hate is too heavy to carry, Arthur. I left the hate in that warehouse with Julian." She looked back at the grave one last time. "He gave me a family," she said. "A messy, broken, terrible family. But he also gave me the power to fix it, to redefine what the name Harrington means." Leo turned away from the dead and looked toward the city skyline, where the Harrington Tower stood tall against the clouds. "Let's go, Arthur," she said, her voice strong, her head high. "We have a company to run." She walked down the path, her steps echoing with purpose. The invisible wife was gone. The ignored daughter was gone. In her place walked Leo Harrington, the woman who had walked into a lion's den and come out wearing a fur coat. And that is how Leo Harrington went from the ignored wife to the most powerful woman in the city. She didn't just inherit a fortune, she inherited the truth. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the keys to the kingdom. Silas Harrington knew that true loyalty is worth more than blood. And in the end, the gutter rat was the only one with a heart of gold. What would you have done if you were Leo? Would you have saved Julian from the mob? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. See you in the next video.